Professor Basoprabu, the director of the center, Professor Ramanandam, the director of the seminar, Professor Sangamitra, the keynote presenter of this seminar, Professor Nayanthara, former director of the center, and other friends participating in the seminar. Normally, we begin with a thanks to the organizers, which I will also do, and particularly Professor Brahmanandam. You must have noticed I'm supposed to be Professor of Economics. And when it comes to the question of issues that have been associated with that of tribal communities, both Professor Basoprabu and Professor Sangamitra have drawn our attention. This is an area which requires a great deal of the kind of sensibilities that you have to develop some kind of a respect for the other. You must have empathy. There is no place for iniquities, iniquitous kind of an approach here. And suggesting that when it comes to the question of the area of understanding and then of course studying tribal communities, the basic requirement is the entire premises is one of value premises. But I come from a discipline where the economists know price of everything but value of nothing. They don't know value of anything. It's a very odd discipline to which I belong. I'm trying to, after retirement particularly, if I have not succeeded earlier in trying to humanize a little bit of economics and understanding it, that it too has some kind of human dimension, which perhaps I would mention toward the end of what perhaps I am going to present. What I am trying to bring you is a purely as economists would do, completely opposite to that of as an anthropologist would do. You just look at the communities at the right from family existence level. Maybe call it as a worm's view of what is happening. But the economists just look at, let's say, the whole thing from a, they may call it as macro or let's say some kind of an eagle view. You just give broad view. It doesn't tell much. That's exactly what I'm going to do. It is not going to tell you, particularly serious students of tribal communities, not much, except what perhaps is said in the name of tribal development. If you have got the message of what I'm trying to say, that I'll proceed. No? This is perhaps what is supposed to be the presentation. See that there lot has been done in the name of programs and policies for tribal communities ever since independence. But has already been emphasized that this is a community which in terms of population is relatively very small. We talk of still 8.6%, we don't know what happened between 2011 and 2015, whether it is 8.5. It would be shocking to see that it declines. I will not be surprised, the kind of things we do for them. It is extremely diverse breadth in terms of space in all the 32 states and most of the union territories. Then when it comes to culture, I think large communities are 550. You can add certain communities and make it 750 because it depends upon how you count. We find that there are certain communities which are, let's say, 3, 4, 5 names for the same. So then it comes to the question of demographics, that's about the population. In fact, the extremely, already mention has been made to this, what we refer to as particularly vulnerable tribal groups. There are some places counted as 75, some places 93, spread over as many as 17 states. And they live in fragile ecosystems. This is the most dangerous kind of situation as far as the tribal communities are concerned. They're extremely off the mainstream in places, distant places like islands, hills, forests. The worst that perhaps that happened is they sit on huge resources or around resources like water resources, minerals, timber. I think this is the one which we normally refer to, that leads them to that of some kind of a resource curse. The very fact they live there is also becoming a disaster for them because of the kind of, let's say, spread of markets. I'll come back to markets towards the end briefly. And the challenge is, if that is the kind of diversity, how do you plan sitting at perhaps at the center or the state level? It's very challenging because most of the directives come from the top and then perhaps to some extent goes to that of state level. And you may have some shape of programs at the district or, let's say, block or different level. Well, anyway, having drawn your attention to this, and all of you, if you are really working in the area of tribal communities and their situation, I don't have to give you this much of introduction. But I think when it comes to the question of designing programs, if you look at the first 4 or 5 year plans, and most of the things done were some kind of more or less what you do for any community. You have, let's say, community development projects at the block level or, let's say, district plans. And the same thing, but with some kind of a mention of these programs being specific. But it is only perhaps at the beginning of the 5th plan they realized that the previous 20 years, not much has reached them when it comes to the question of the planning for development of tribal communities. That is how, for the first time, they designed, in 1972 actually, tribal sub-plans. This is also, again, a way of, bureaucratic way of looking at it. I am not criticizing it. If at all anything has done, this has done it. If at all anything is demanded by tribal communities, they continue to say what happened to our sub-plan. But it's a mechanical kind of thing, that you look at the population in a place, state, depending upon where you are looking at, and proportionately, if you have, let's say, plant resources, you just, let's say, population proportion, take the population proportion and allocate resources especially for this group according to their population. The idea is that the larger resources allocated for a plan should not end up without reaching them. And therefore, if you specify legally, now I think in some of the states legally binding, that if this money belonging to this particular population, which is about 25%, the plan funds also 25% must go to them. So that's how it is designed. And I think in the case of separate sub-plans, the allocations come in. But see that centrally what you do is you allocate by departments. And then you think in terms of, let's say, in each department's allocation, a part, which is the population proportion part, should go to that of, let's say, the particular communities which we call as tribal communities. But this is how perhaps they tried to push this program, and by the time we refer to that of, let's say, the end of 1980s, you have some kind of a system that emerged, that you have, let's say, integrated tribal development areas with a program. I mean, the numbers I have given, because I'm not going to read all those things. There are also, you identified 75 as PVGTs, and then these PVGTs also get, let's say, specific kind of allocation. That's happened perhaps for the first time towards the end of 75 plan. But I think at the end of, for instance, all this, when we come to that of, let's say, 1910, the report by the Tribal Affairs, Ministry of Tribal Affairs itself points out many ministries reported differentially in segregating tribal subplan from the individual projects, which apply to that of tribal communities becomes very difficult. And what they are trying to say, for instance, you have an irrigation project, and that irrigation money, if you have to allocate proportionately to that of tribal communities, the ministry is not able to do is, how do you design a project where this particular proportion helps, let's say, tribals? Either you have a separate project for tribals, or you have, let's say, a project which covers everybody. That proportion is very difficult to do. See, these are kinds of problems you face when it comes to the question of centralized allocation. Therefore, they wanted this, the idea is, once you are not able to do it properly, then the idea comes, look, there's something wrong with the guidelines, appoint, let's say, a task force. That's how Narendra Jadhav task force was appointed, and then of course he came with a lot of, let's say, recommendations relating to that of, let's say, separately designing projects for tribal communities. He talks in terms of central allocation. It's much easier for the center because you can say specifically this much of amount, which could also be proportionate to that of, let's say, plan, could go to this sector, which perhaps is the tribal sector. That's how they had, of the 15 sectoral programs and centrally sponsored programs, they could design separate kind of allocations. But I think even that was not successful. I just stopped, see that what I'm trying to do is first I give this larger picture of what was happening to that of, let's say, resource flow for the development, financial resource flow particularly, and the design of programs. And now I think moving on to that of, let's say, a particular aspect of development, namely that of education policy. Before that, I think the last one closes with what Professor Brahmanandam said about the recent additions, like, let's say, the transformative policies, which is attributed to that of the present Prime Minister, right from, let's say, the kind of financial inclusion, other, let's say, 4 or 5 programs. That is the situation. But I would like to, let's say, leave that, the kind of mapping of programs that existed. But I would specifically focus on, let's say, what was happening to that of education of the different programs. Here again, when we refer to that of education, the first 2 plans are about 10 years, and of course now I must also drive our attention that with the end of the plans, that's exactly the significance of what Brahmanandam said. See that once we come to that 12th Fire Plan, 2014, it's halfway through, plan programs were wound up, planning commission was wound up, and therefore now it comes as, let's say, government discretionary kind of programs. That's how you talk in terms of Prime Minister's transformative programs for tribal communities. So it's nothing to do with that of any funding problem. You can just say, these are the transformative programs, this is the money allocated straight away. And of course, much depends upon the existing infrastructure, administrative infrastructure, already created. That's the ITDAs and actually the administrative systems that exist there. And let's say the implementation becomes, let's say, the basis that existed earlier, but the allocations become different programs. But now coming to that of education, for education also the first 10 years there was no specific kind of, let's say, programs for education. For instance, that's how in the beginning of the third five plan there was the so-called, now I think very popularly known as UN Labour Committee, who was a Congress leader at that time. This is called the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Commission, which made several recommendations. In fact, here, besides, of course, this routine thing to say that open more schools, provide hostels, but one interesting thing that was made even in 1960-61, which we perhaps even now, even today it's become difficult to see it happen. The Labour Committee did recommend that there should be programs for education which are sensitive to the tribal culture and language resources. But this has not happened for quite some time. In fact, much more emphatic was the Kothari Commission, which I think we keep on saying. Kothari Commission said 6% should be given to education. They made very pointed reference to the tribal communities. It reinforced the recommendation of the Labour Committee, particularly when it comes to the question of education of tribal communities. Agreeing with that, it should be the one in tune with that of cultural resources as well as language resources. That means early education of tribal communities must involve their own languages. It's challenging because we have seen that the number of languages that when it comes to the question of, let's say, there are, I think the earlier list shows there are more than 1,000 kind of languages. But when it comes to some of them are also at the stage of endangering. But still there are dominant kind of, let's say, communities, languages which can be, let's say, done. In fact, Kothari Commission, like in the case of other kind of areas of education, was also somewhat restless because it was already 3 5-year plans. Nothing was happening to the tribal communities. And therefore, they emphasized within 10 years, but by the time the Kothari Commission submitted its report in 66, by 75, 76, that there should be inclusive education, elementary education, that's what they refer to, early education, for all tribal children. And that is possible through that of parental education. Because most of the time you motivate the parent to take the child to that of, let's say, the school. I mean, that's why they emphasized, interestingly, even at that time, the need for parental education, which perhaps we are talking about now. Parental education as much as, let's say, encouraging tribal children's education. Of course, when it comes to the first 30 years, of course, including the first 2 plans, the outcome that is reported is the poor learning outcomes, high dropouts, and almost 56% of scheduled tribe children yet to get even elementary education. They have not perhaps even entered the elementary schools, but 30 years of, let's say, planning, your own independence. And therefore, the 7th plan, I think this is, a general commission again, like Kothari Commission. We had a new education commission in 1986, which again prioritized as far as the tribal communities are concerned, curriculum based on, again, cultural identity of scheduled communities and their language. I mean, that perhaps it keeps that you know that Kothari's emphasis 75, 76, nothing happened. Even in 86, this is the way in which they had to talk in terms of. But what came out of this New Education Commission 1986 as far as the larger program is Operation Blackboard, which I think emphasized the need for increasing the infrastructure, not only classrooms, hostels, buildings, but the teachers. I think the emphasis was made that the teachers, as far as possible, should be from the same communities. That's perhaps one of the things that happened there. And then they started this, not Abraham schools, there is a spelling mistake. There is ashram schools that came, that see some residential schools, and along with that a national program of nutrition support. It is, I think, the idea is that even you are trying to open schools, taking them to schools, but they are not there in schools. Many of them are, let's say, coming out, let's say, are not attending. That's why the system of open, let's say, national open school system came. Those who are dropouts are not going to school, they should be provided special training, brought back to school. This has happened for even other kind of, let's say, communities as well. And when it comes to the question of, let's say, this coming into the national design for universal elementary education, it came, let's say, much before the operation of what we refer to as the RT Act in 2009. But I think the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan aimed at, let's say, universal elementary education. I think the 10th plan, again, you could see that multilingual education specifically applies to that of tribal communities also, that they must start with that of tribal language as well. But I think if you come back and let's say look in right now, let's say that where are the textbooks, tribal language? Where is, I think, the language itself was neglected. And we have now a list of some states, like for instance, I see at Telangana has developed 5 textbooks in 5 tribal languages, and like that, perhaps Madhya Pradesh and Odisha, there are some textbooks coming now. But you see that the emphasis on multilingual, let's say including that of mother tongue or whatever, the tribal community being educated in their own language, with some kind of, let's say, examples from their own cultural ethos. That would happen only when you design a textbook which has not come for quite some time. And then when it comes to the question of this 1614 as the Universal Education under RTA Act, that seems to have caused much more damage than that of, I'm not saying that everybody must go to school, but you go to school up to 14 years. That means most of the schools were upper primary schools. And of course the dropouts, as perhaps I will also throw some numbers, not that you don't know, but since of course I said the economists go by only national surveys, they don't understand local situations. Therefore, to be an economist, I must also give you something at the national level. This is all what was happening. The way in which I am presenting my mood also you would understand. I am very unhappy man when we come to that of, let's say, putting these things across to people who are particularly working with the tribal communities. You may get disgusted of sometimes what this nonsense keep on saying, national program law, when there are challenging kind of problems when it comes to the question of tribals. But we, of course, still do that. I'm not saying you should not do anything, but you can also start as they did in 2013, Indira Gandhi National Tribal University. Now it is supposed to, every state will have a central tribal university. We have one in Andhra Pradesh. We have another which has come without the Vice Chancellor for some time in Telangana. And of course the person I had the pleasure of spending time with the Vice Chancellor of Andhra Central Tribal University. He's a very nice person, Kattimani. He's from this place. He's a very knowledgeable person. He comes from the tribal communities. Therefore, he has all the qualities that we have referred to here. I mean, in the beginning, you go to this subject with empathy, with a kind of, let's say, respect for their culture. I mean, some of these things are very essential. It's not, there is, unlike social science or science, I think, particularly economics pretends it's the science. And therefore, they would talk in terms of detachment from the subject. It is a disaster in tribal studies. If you are detached, if you don't have an attachment to your subject, where do you get empathy? Where do you have values? Well, anyway, we keep on that. The increasing budget for this is, of course, it is doing something that Ekalavya, the Akalavya, no, it's the Ekalavya. Perhaps somebody is playing, or the display itself may be playing some. It is also angry that I am saying Ekalavya, because this is done with some good objective. See, it's done, I think I will show you. It is done 1990, when was it? Yeah, okay. It was started in 97, 98. I think there is somewhere I have a list which talks in terms of, you see, for instance, this is what is up. You propose something, that means the Ekalavya model schools were proposed in 1997, 98. They proposed 689 schools. They started 503 schools, but only 401 are functioning. We don't know how it is functioning. That is a little. See, this is what happens. In fact, of course, they added something. There are Ekalavya schools are at least making a difference because they are putting a lot of resources. And then, of course, they have added recently 59 skill hubs with vocational training, and then 15 EMR also centers have added that there should be sports activity. The idea is that Ekalavya school would provide a comprehensive total education to that of tribal communities. That's the idea of starting them. And of course, the present, what is perhaps is supposed to be coming into effect, the new educational policy, also talks in terms of, again, local languages up to 5th grade, preferably till 8th grade, and flexible bilingual approach. And it is still to happen as perhaps is as desired. I'm sorry, I mean, after these programs, I'll just quickly run through some of the data that you have as to what is happening to that of ground level. It is perhaps gross enrollment rates at the different levels up to what is called as upper primary. I mean that somebody wrote very interestingly about Indian education in general, not only education of tribal communities. They said that India has succeeded in sending children to schools, but they have to educate them. That is the number that we have for up to 8th class, everybody goes now. The numbers, of course, you know why this 109, 105, because there are underage people as well as overage people in that age group, in that class group. Therefore, it shows more than 100%. But you come down to that, a more critical thing is, if you have to make it, this is exactly where I said about the RTA also. If you just say that first class to that of, let's say, 8th class, it is doing more injustice to that of education of children. Without, let's say, that RT doesn't even talk about preschool. There is so much, and Madam was talking in terms of such sensibilities. and then emerging literature relating to that of the kind of development of a child. Now they are saying preschool is the time when child has all creative, cognitive capabilities developed. If we have strong foundational school, and it should start with that of, let's say, preschool 3 years from third year itself. Leave alone, let's say, tribal communities, but it is not happening to another. The Anganwadis are shown as the preschool. That would be, I think, doing more damage than that of any service. We have to take care of this particular dimension. Similarly, if you don't have, let's say, up to 18 years, let's say, I think 12th class, equally quality education, it doesn't mean that they will face the future, because which is a lifelong kind of learning. For instance, what Professor said about, let's say, the health and other things, it's a continuous learning now. Our own understanding of health also keeps, let's say, changing, because there's a lot which we do not know about several things, not only physical but also human dimensions. As we go, that we have to be in a position to absorb and, let's say, move forward. And the same, see that when I started teaching economics in 1966 is not the same economics that I continue to do that. If I have to continue to do that, I must have a strong foundation, basic foundation in what we call as a STEM, basics, science, that you can't leave, let's say, how do you understand what is happening to the whole world now? You talk in terms of planetary boundaries being crossing, you talk of climate, how do you understand? How do I understand as a citizen, how that as a teacher? If you are a teacher in, let's say, social science, it doesn't mean you don't understand science. You must have a strong foundation in mathematics. That's the idea of having from third year to that of 18th year, that is, I think, up to 12th class, strong quality education, which would make people different. I'm taking this occasion to bring other issues also. It's very important, because I'm saying, even now you are talking in terms of tribal education, taking them to school and taking them to 8th class. But it must go, that it applies to other communities as well. If we don't spend more money now, and then imagine we have a still like a Bible quoting from only 1966 Kosari Commission. But this has to, imagine if general education itself doesn't get the kind of resource allocation, how do you expect that the money goes to down to communities which perhaps still looked down upon, and looked at the other? And how do you, if you have put, let's say, that first preschool education as a strong foundation, they would also respect others. But the kind of kite flying that we do now, that you're not training people to, let's say, respect others. That will not happen if you don't give them strong education, which is as perhaps he said in Ekalavi, I think, a comprehensive, rounded kind of education. It's very essential, but I think as perhaps it happens, can I move on? Okay, this is about higher education, of course. Percentages are good. I mean, that we were discussing coming here what type of graduates we are sending in, and then okay, we may be happy because they have gone from 11% to 18%. But we don't know what kind of education we are giving. Particularly this education without a strong foundation up to 12 years. Whatever you build, the kind of things that Director Saab was telling this, see, you must be in a position to pick up a skill. How do you do that? You're in a position to understand what perhaps is behind a phenomenon. How does it happen? You must have strong logical and cognitive kind of capacity to reason, and then you move forward. Whatever the challenge, you move in your own area to different kind of things. In fact, For instance, even in, let's say, so-called strong social sciences like economics, it's very important to understand larger aspects of, let's say, life and, let's say, the changes happening. Okay, and there may be some number-wise some satisfaction, but you could see that when it comes to the question of completed level, this is, I think, of course, that is not 13, 18, it's 17, 18, because that is the last source, because as you see that this is another problem. We don't even have basic information about it. Anyway, census 12, I mean 11, and we don't know what is happening to total population. But even about some of these qualities, we don't get data. After that is 17, 18 is a NSS focused kind of a survey on social dimension, education. They have similarly for health, but I think we don't get that now as frequently as it should happen. Well, next please. That when it comes to the question of gender gap in education is universal. You don't expect gender gap to be much better. But what is interesting is the gender gap is rapidly filling up. In fact, in some of the cases, the gender difference, as you could see in the case of, let's say that there are, you would find that for instance, the grade up to primary, there is some kind of a positive there. That means that there are more, as you go on, that there are numbers which show there are more girls in the school than boys. That is happening, but that doesn't itself mean that we have done gender justice. What kind of education we provide depends on that, but it is not a mean achievement. Even in the case of tribal children, what that Katimani was trying to tell me that when it comes to the question of dropouts, the number of problems, okay, that here is something of dropouts, yes. This is about, this is a critical stages. Largely, as we are referring to the structure, because you know, 9th to 10th, that dropout is so high, largely because most of the schools are, let's say, up to 8th class, upper primary. And that is our Right to Education Act. You provide up to 8th class, schools also are up to 8th class in most of the places. Where do they go? I mean, besides other problems. Therefore, I think there is a huge kind of substantial part, let's say, get dropped out at this stage. You could see it's not only dropouts for scheduled tribe communities, but it's 10% even at that stage, even for the so-called general categories also fairly high. And then of course the results, I mean this is another area one must be very careful, because I quote Katimani because he's heading a university there, that his own experiences, many of you who are working in actually ground level, the results are particularly, should be taken, I mean these are averages for those 11 to 16, taken with some kind of a care, because there are places where, I had a student who was doing research with me. He came back from the field and said, in some of the schools they are writing exams. And he came back, and I think many of you might have, because you are the people who go to field. He came back and said that they're all writing so fine. I mean, their handwriting, I mean, that's another thing is tribal communities have such kind of fine capabilities for art and other things. If you show something, they can copy this whole thing without any problem. So what was happening was the blackboards were full of answers. And they are just sitting and writing, they can't read. Because they can copy, but beautifully copy the whole thing. but can't read. So you pass the exam. And are we not doing injustice to this kind of a thing to them? That you are saying that they are passing. But where do they go? Well, anyway, these things some of you know that when it comes to the question of there are certain things that we say, okay, there's 16, 15 to 17. This is, okay, this is, I mean, although the heading reads like out of school dropouts, never enrolled, but this refers to that of never enrolled only, one category. But see, the first reason is not interested. Okay, that's it. But particularly first one, most of them say they are not interested in the sense that you have not created an atmosphere where they would think that education would perhaps be helpful. So therefore, what is the point in going there that my brother has finished the same way in which I showed you? I mean, I was telling you about how he passed the exam, he is not going anywhere. Therefore, why go to school? I mean, the parents also take that attitude. Therefore, that particularly if you talk to the mothers, and many of you must be talking to them, there is hardly any person. I have also traveled across field, and I'm not saying I'm an economist, not travel, go to field. There is not a single mother which did not say that her top priority is school. In fact, some places they even challenged. Why, you see, but we also ask another question, do you want also English medium? Why not? You people think you are only eligible to read English. My children must get educated in English. See, that ambition, aspiration of parents, the poorer they are, the most intensely they are feeling this must be understood. If we take them to school, don't give them education and send them back, this is what hurts us. Many times we get some people who have passed several exams but they don't know anything. But who is responsible? The school, the teachers and all that. You send him a degree, you are doing injustice to the whole society. The parents expect so much from the children and you are sending them back without knowing anything. It's cruel. It's not, let's say, inhuman. This is where all the qualities that they refer to, that of sympathy, empathy, all this is needed when you design education. It is not like some kind of a market where perhaps you can be sent away because you don't have money. This is something foundational. And therefore, if somebody gives that answer, I'm not interested, that's, I think, most dangerous. It's not that they are not interested. We are not providing them right kind. Okay, this is I owe this to that of I also acknowledge this. I took it from him. We are almost similar situation there. Of course, we may attend seminars, but not that much enlightened. He was listing all this. Perhaps most of you would know that there would be these reasons are also mostly applicable to that of non-STs, particularly SC and then some of the OBC communities as well, that stigma, classroom, and then when it comes to the question of identity crisis, teacher, not only absenteeism, but insensitivity of the teachers, all these things lead to that. This is where I think language barriers, this is the list of languages, tribal languages, 1635 languages, 197 are almost, of course, endangered, yeah, it's gone. I think many of them would go because there is no way of recording them also. Well, next slide is there, yeah. This is where I want to, I have already given my mind. There is one, I think the first one refers to that if there are, and then madam is also from geography background. She would appreciate, she was talking about health, geography, and then I think, draw, there is also a geography officer, he has gone.
Yes, it is.
He was also head of the department of science department. Geography sometimes, because their cartography is science, the other part is, let's say, social science. Therefore, he is put in science department, he is also dean. But anyway, geography is very important for this. And then the last one, I would say a few words. That's where I am. Let me first put the geography. Next slide. This is the geography. You see that if you look at 32 states and then they're spread all over, you see the proportions there. When it comes to it's all, you see that from east to west, eastern India starting with that of let's say Bihar, Jharkhand, I have just combined, there is only 1.3% of tribal population in Bihar, because we know that they should have gone along with Jharkhand. Therefore, I have made that adjustment. That doesn't make much change. The idea is that if you have to put of your finger, because no, you can't think in terms of, let's say, bird's eye view or some such thing. You have to put a finger, look at this Janus face. Let's say it's completely different. You look at, let's say, where is that? If you total that first group, is there any total there? No. Yeah. 73.5% of the total tribal population in India are in these east to west states. 73. That's the problem. Most of the problems are there. If you look at, let's say, problem number 1, Madhya Pradesh. 14 point, where is Madhya Pradesh? Yeah. 14.7%. The largest concentration of tribal population in Madhya Pradesh, and of course, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, we know that. Maharashtra also is a huge, I have 2 friends from Maharashtra, it's a huge population, 10.1%. It's only second, in terms of sizes. So if you look at, let's say, the last column, which I think Madam was referring to, that of human development as a comprehensive kind of thing. If you look at that, the performance of these 8 states is almost low. Some exception, there is the M there, middle level. Lowest level of performance in these major states which account for, let's say, the tribal population. When you come down, you talk in terms of Northeast, we think it's all problem is Northeast, there are large Northeast, because most of the states have large proportion of, they're all on just 12%. They have no problem. Their problem is not education, their problem is not even as much health, their problem other problems, they are a problem of development. They are already better educated, better provided for education, but they require some more freedom, some more kind of, let's say, activities. Therefore, no, the entire Northeast comprises just 12%. Therefore, when it comes to the question of problem, you have to zero in down to that of the so-called, let's say, dangerous phase of tribal communities in these states, and then you start with that of Madhya Pradesh. See, in fact, in this seminar where Professor Kattimade was also there was field report from Madhya Pradesh. You just cannot believe. See, because it appears the parents are threatened, because no, the orientation is such that the parents are threatened by children that they are not being provided, but I don't know, some of the youngsters may know, DJ, that music, no? The loudest music he makes in the village, he is supposed to be better. Therefore, he fights with parents, not school. Give me DJ, otherwise I will commit suicide. See, there is such a very strange kind of, let's say, demand. That means we have lost the kind of orientation that children would need. No, why do you thank already? Just a minute, I'm also in a hurry, because last one is very important for me. Well, I just wanted to register it, Because the extremes ought to be, see that we have to understand them by starting somewhere as a major problem. It is, if you open up Madhya Pradesh, you are opening up most of the problems of tribal communities. I am not saying other places. It has everything, right from child marriage to that of, let's say, this DJ. So the extreme kind of things happen there. I don't know what is happening there. We don't know much about what is happening in Madhya Pradesh. Except Mela Patkar's agitation, displacement, yes, because this is also, I think, one, if looks closely, the other problem that I'm going to, leading to the last problem, most of the problems occur here. This is the place where the extensive destruction of forests, extensive resource exploitation, extensive major project construction, this happens. And this parallelly happens. And then you just massively lakhs of people are moved out, and then you talk in terms of, and how the challenge is, if you don't have empathy, understanding, how we are resettling them, I think, yeah, now you can go to the last one. See, this is the one. See, that my question is, who should bear, what is that, no? I'm sorry, that not who should bear, no? It's B-E-A-R, not who should bear the responsibility. Okay, that is the question with which we address now development of tribal communities. Even a hardened, heartless discipline like economics also now talks in terms of true cost accounting. TCA is emerging as one of the important areas. What is the TCA? If we look at, let's say, development in India, if people, lakhs of people were displaced, if we say that tribals are only 8.6%, the proportion of tribals displaced are 46%. If you look at, let's say, the kind of true cost, now you are saying that, say, in the plan, there are 8.6%, tribal community 8.6%, what you have done? What is the true cost that you have to bear if you have to rehabilitate and develop them? If you do not see with that eye, I think now I'm also taking in a very bad way notes of both Professor Prabhu and then of course Madam Sangamitra. See, they're talking in terms of, I think I was, yes. See, this is the way that he talked in terms of Arunachal Pradesh. Such a beautiful place, such a nice people. What is that we are doing there? Hydroelectric projects. How many hydroelectric projects? Who are constructing? All history we know that, okay, the damages are done by the state would build that. It's given to private contractors, corporate sector does it. And then of course we also talked in terms of, interestingly, alcohol. You know what alcohol, madam said that you have to look at it. Buster, you know, and there was now he is world famous, but anyway, he also became Vice Chancellor of Nehu. Sensible civil servant, B.D. Sharma. You must all know B.D. Sharma. B.D. Sharma was Bastar collector. So what was happening is that tribal communities make their own alcohol. Or let's say they have Karyota pond, which perhaps they drink. It's very good health thing. In fact, one of my anthropology friends, this boys for Ega, but the senior students came along, PhD students. They were doing land question in tribal areas. I also went for that. He took me there and then showed me Karyota pond, what it does. He said that you come in, let's say, May. Everyone is famished, weak and all that. Come in October. Everybody is looking round and round. Yeah, see, because they have this waste kind of, what we call as thread you tie here, we don't try now, but anyway. So that in May, there are several knots in the thread, which is tied. By October, they have removed one after the other, because they have become, it's all carried upon 6 months. It's good food, morning and evening. All of them share it. And that perhaps now is being cut for clear felling, at 2,500 feet sea level. You destroy their food, that's such resource food. The second is this alcohol. I come to that BD Sharma. When he was collector, he found that they drew their own thing. There is no expense involved. It's not that they are all drunk and destroying themselves. They drink. But this was noticed from place to place. But what has happened is, they have given licenses to sell Indian-made foreign liquor. Gangs of these fellows who have licenses will raid these things. Because they see, once they brew their own liquor, there is no market for these fellows. Their quarters and halves and fulls won't sell. They are raiding them. And BD Sharma observed this and wrote a letter to Indira Gandhi, at that time Prime Minister. She said that you must say that there should not be no entry for the Indian-made foreign liquor licenses to the tribal areas. The second, there should not be any intervention with that of their own food or drink. But of course, I don't know what happened, but this is the narration he gave us when he was narrating as to what was happening when he was a collector in Bastar. And of course, it's all markets. So there is no market for my liquor, and therefore I destroy them. And then, sir, then to get my profits, I give hydroelectric projects to Arunachal Pradesh. I don't know, next time when we go, I don't know what happens. You say that, well, we have to do good things for tribal communities, give this program, that program. And then I think there is a thing, I said I will also say one more thing. This is, this is I think the markets. Again, Madam said, drew attention to your mention of the so-called indigenous knowledge systems, known system like the deliveries. And see that no person, see them, it affects cottage industry now. Caesareans are cottage industry. And if you do it free and then easy and no risk, I lose my thing. Then you look at the coastal Andhra, they do two things. One is of course Caesarean, the other is what is called the removal of uterus. Yes. This is the cottage industry, that every woman who comes say, your 2 children removed, you collect money. See, this kind of atrocious kind of things we do, can we expect to have any respect to them? Therefore, over the last, let's say, 75 years, what we have done to tribal communities is much more damage than that of development. And if we have to correct it, be more sensible, be more, let's say, respectful to their knowledge systems. Try to understand the kind of contribution that they make. Don't unnecessarily, for instance, now the latest thing, I'll close with that, Nicobar Islands. Is that the place where you build 130 square kilometers transit port? I don't know. The number of trees that have been listed here that you have to cut, virgin kind of trees, I don't know, I don't think they come, that if you read, I mean, for even anthropologists, it's good. Latest issue of Frontline is worth reading, everybody should read that, to see what perhaps is likely to damage. And it's not, this is not the thing we should do to them. We have to be very careful, and as far as at least as social scientists, we must be in a more sensible way of looking at these problems. And then of course, we do our work. We just report the kind of things which should not be done. And it's going to be disastrous if we continue to do that and then have plans. doesn't help. This will continue to increase the jam space, not only perhaps in those areas, it's happening to our own society. Inequity seems to be foundation than the equity as the basis for addressing these problems. Therefore, thank you very much because I am a person who sits, Professor knows, he was asking me to sit in the chair, I had to sit. He had to ask me to come here, I have come. I don't know anything more than that because he commands, I oblige. But unfortunately, you have to listen to me also because all the blame is on you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I request Jafar to give concluding remarks for this session.
Sir, just I will take a minute. Sir, actually the debate is never ending when we come to the development interventions, especially in the northeastern region. You were mentioning about the hydroelectric projects, so that are being introduced into especially Arunachal. I remember in the year 2000, when I went to Pasighat for reporting, I think it took almost 48 hours to reach that particular place from Calcutta to Guwahati. From Guwahati it is 630 kilometers, 18 hours journey by road. But now, after that pool between Silapathar and Dibrugarh, so within 2 hours we can reach, 2 to 3 hours maximum. So this is the effect of the development interventions, especially because I had one very sad event also with my wife because of lack of medical attention. We could not come to Dibrugarh, and there was a significant loss. Just I don't want to mention there, and there was no medical attention there. But now, so we don't have any such issues. Without such development initiatives, we cannot think of the overall development of that particular region. But now the situation is changing. Yes. What kind of projects should be introduced and to what extent? Yes, there might be a debate and there can be a debate.
Development without destruction.
Yeah, because
But then the question of who benefits from it?
it is the local communities, ultimately the local communities. As I was explaining about my sufferings,
Positive
so
things.
the local issues, the local communities might have suffered a lot that I might not be aware of. Yeah. So this is it.